My name is Natalie Collins and I'm going to be talking to you a bit about domestic abuse today. I have done lots of work both within the church and more broadly around issues of male violence, including domestic abuse, pornography, child sexual exploitation, female genital mutilation, and lots of other topics. And you can find out more about my overall work at nataliecollins.info. I'm doing a lot of work at the minute, doing online training to equip female practitioners to be able to work with women on issues around abuse through a course that I've written called the Own My Life course. It's ownmylifecourse.org if you'd like to know more about that. And some of the work that I've done with Christians has been done through the organisation Press Red. You can find out more about Press Red at pressred.org. So you've probably seen lots of stuff in the headlines in newspapers about how domestic abuse has risen over the coronavirus crisis, and how being in lockdown can be very, very horrific and really terrifying for those who are locked down with somebody who is abusive. And that's probably something that you're coming across. And as practitioners, as people who are working within urban communities, you're probably coming across domestic abuse a lot of the time. Some of you who are watching this will have been subjected to abuse. Either you've seen this stuff going on when you were a child, or you've been subjected to abuse by a previous partner, or it may be possible that some of you are watching this who are currently being subjected to abuse. So please do take care. If this stuff brings up stuff for you, that you don't have to watch it, and look after yourself. We are all in a global pandemic, and one of the things I find myself saying all the time is, if you can't struggle in a global pandemic, when can you struggle? And so if this is bringing up stuff for you, do take the care and get the support that you need to be able to deal with that. And anybody who's watching this, who as we go through this content, if you're watching this and you're thinking, I'm recognizing my own behavior here, I'm recognizing that actually I do some of those things, I would encourage you to seek some help. And one of the places you can do that is the Respect Perpetrator phone line, which you can Google, and I'll make sure that I've provided the website and telephone number for that. And also, if you or somebody you know is struggling with abuse, or you watch this and realize actually some of what's going on in my life or the lives of people I care about, and you're recognizing some of that might be abuse, then you can contact the National Domestic Violence Helpline, and I'll provide a website and telephone number for that too. The telephone number is 0808 2000 24/7. And do be aware that there is massive demand for the phone line. So if you ring, it might take a bit of time for you to get through, but do persevere, because if you're watching this and you need help, or you know somebody who needs help, it is so important that you find someone safe to talk to. So having said all that, I wanted to start by explaining to you what abuse is. Often when we think about domestic violence or domestic abuse, we have some idea that it happens in the context of a relationship. It happens between a couple is often how it's understood. It's happening. And we understand generally that there could be stuff around physical violence. I think there is more and more understanding that it can also be about emotional abuse or psychological abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse. And it can be about controlling somebody and manipulating somebody and putting someone down. And it's really important that we grasp what abuse is, because one of the big problems with responding to abuse is that it's actually really hard to identify that something is abuse, or to recognize that something's abuse. The reality is, rarely is somebody going to disclose to us, I'm a victim of domestic abuse, please will you help me? And if that happens, then that really is really helpful in terms of being able to support that person and to enable them to move forward. But in reality, most people who are being subjected to abuse do not know that they are being abused, do not identify with the label of abuse or violence. And we're really psychologically predisposed we're really psychologically predisposed to not accept that what's going on is abuse. We want to believe it's just a difficult time, and really it's going to be okay, and he really loves me, and I'm not one of those women, I'm not somebody who would be abused, and he's not one of those men. We're not like that. And so we want to believe that it's just a difficult time, that maybe things are going to get better soon, because the minute we attach the label abuse to what is being done to us, to what our partner is behaving like, suddenly we can't ignore it anymore. Suddenly we can't just expect that it's just going to change. And it's really scary. It's like there's a bomb going off in our life, and that's absolutely terrifying. So I'd really encourage as you're watching this, to really be thinking about, what does abuse actually look like? What is somebody doing to another person? And you'll have noticed already that I'm talking very much about women as those who are subjected to abuse, and men as those who are perpetrating the abuse. And that's not to say that men cannot be victimized, that men cannot be subjected to abuse. Most men are subjected to abuse by a male perpetrator, so within same-sex relationships, or because they were abused by a man when they were a child, or another as an adult. So the majority of men who are victims are subjected to abuse by male perpetrators. However, there are women who are abusive, and there are men that are abused by women. So my communication today and what I'm talking about is not about trying to dismiss those who are male and are abused. Please don't watch this and think that. But the reality is that 92% of defendants in domestic abuse-related crime are male. A third of women will be subjected to abuse in the UK at some point in their lifetime. 72% of girls will be emotionally abused by a boyfriend by the time they're 16. 32% of girls will be sexually abused by a boyfriend by the time they're 16. This is really huge, and it's a massive issue. And so we really need to respond to this as it is, and saying, well, it can happen to men too, it can be done to men too, is often a way of not really facing the reality that this is a gendered issue. And if we want to respond to it effectively, we have to be willing to accept that there is a gendered analysis. And so I'm not going to apologize for saying that men are the majority of the perpetrators and that women are the majority of the victims. Well, women and children are the majority of the victims, and obviously around 50% of those children are going to be male. But we can't support men, we can't support women, and we can't support children if we don't recognise that this is a gendered issue. So I'm going to talk you through a bit of what somebody who is abusive looks like, and I'm going to send a resource over that you can have to take away with you. It looks like this, and I'm going to talk you through that now. So hopefully you'll be able to come have this and get hold of this at some point. So if I was to talk to you and be there with you, I would ask you, how do you define abuse? And if you want to, you can pause this right now and then maybe make some notes about, how do you define abuse? What would you think abuse involves? So if you want to pause it and have a think about that, write it down on a piece of paper, and then you can unpause it, and then I'll be going through what abuse actually is. If you don't have time to do that, then you can just keep listening and I'll continue to talk. So a lot of the time when we think about abuse, when we write down what we think abuse is, we often use very conceptual words. We say things like physical or emotional or psychological or financial, as I said before. But the reality is that doesn't visibly help us to think about what is somebody like when they're being abusive. What is that person doing to that other person that is abusive? And so we need to think much more about what does it look like? What is somebody doing to another person? How does that feel to be treated like that? And then we can much more effectively understand what is going on. So if somebody's abusive, then they will behave in a number of different ways, but every abuser kind of has a pattern of behavior. And there are some kind of across the board behaviors and across the board intentions behind an abuser's behavior that we'll look at. So if somebody's abusive, they will often isolate their partner. So they will convince them to move to a place where they don't know anybody. They will not let them see their friends or family. And that might be by saying, well, you're not seeing your mother anymore. You're not speaking to your mother anymore. Or it might be by eroding our trust in our family and friends. They might say something like, how well do you know Natalie? And you say, I know really well. Why? And they say, oh, no reason. I just wondered. And we're left thinking, well, what do they know about Natalie? So there's this erosion of trust in our friends and our family. And this is really dangerous if we are isolated and we don't have family and friends we can speak to. We don't have anybody to counter the abuser's narrative. So they will isolate us. They might be humiliating us. So that might be about sexual violence or forcing us to do things sexually which make us feel uncomfortable or make us feel dirty or ashamed. But equally, it might be about mocking us or encouraging the children to call us nasty names. It's about making us feel like we're shriveled up inside. There's the threatener who makes us feel scared for our own or other people's safety and makes us feel we can't trust anyone. Those threats might be very explicit, saying, if you leave me, I'm going to kill the dog. If you leave me, I'm going to kill your mother, or I'm going to kill myself. So there's all these things which might be explicit threats, but equally they might say something like, well, I love you so much. I just wouldn't survive without you. I might end up doing something really, really stupid. So it becomes much more ambiguous, but we know that they're threatening suicide if we leave. They might be saying things like, well, like, I'm not saying I ever would have an affair, but, I mean, if you didn't give me what I wanted sexually, I might have to, might I? And so suddenly that thing is in our head now that says, oh, well, maybe he'll cheat on me if I don't give him what he wants sexually. He doesn't have to explicitly say, you've got to do what I want, but it ends up being that way. And they make us feel like we can't trust anybody. They make us feel trapped. The exhauster stops us getting enough sleep. That might be about waking us up in the middle of the night because they want to talk or they want to have sex with us or whatever. It might be that they start an argument just before bed, and so we're then up all night stressed and they're fast asleep. It might be that they make us do everything in the house, and if we ask for their support, if we ask them to be an equal partner, they start kicking off and saying, how could you do this, and I work really hard, and why aren't you doing your bit, and that kind of thing. And they make it all about what we're failing to do, and quickly shift the responsibility and the focus of their failures onto ours. The brainwasher keeps us focused on them all the time, and so we never get to think about our own needs or our own wants. Doesn't give us time or space to think. They might be being emotionally abusive, saying that we're worthless, nobody else would want us, and they might be mocking us, our body or the things that we like. When we express an interest in a particular program or a particular musician or something like that, they'll mock us and say, oh, why would you like them, they're stupid. And so we're left thinking that there's something wrong with us all the time. They call us names, they make us think that we're going mad. We, in the morning, like maybe on a Tuesday morning, they say, should we go out at the weekend? And we say, yeah, that'd be great. And then at the weekend, we say, we're going out. And they'll say, no, why would we do that? And we'll say, well, because on Tuesday you said we were going to go out. And they say, no, never said that. And then we're left thinking, well, am I going mad? What's going on? So they brainwash us. And one of the crucial things the brainwasher does is about minimizing, denying, and blaming their behavior. So they minimize it. It's all about avoiding responsibility. So it was just a little slap. It was I only pushed you a little bit. It's you bruise so easily. So they minimize what they've done, and they minimize their intention. Well, I didn't mean it. I hardly touched you. And so they minimize it, they deny it, didn't even go near you. I don't know how that happened. You fell. I wasn't anywhere near you when you did that. Denial and blame. And so they never take responsibility. It's their awful childhood. It's their alcohol or drug issues. It's their family background, or it's us. We make them do it. They never ever take responsibility. And by always shifting responsibility off themselves onto somebody else, usually onto us, they always get to be entirely innocent of any of the behaviours. The Almighty uses extreme acts of power, so violence or aggression, to convince us that they have all the power. This might be about smashing things that are precious to us. This might be about being physically violent. This might be about smashing holes in walls, because that hole's there forever then. And we know even when we cover it up, we can see what they were capable of doing, how they were capable of ruining what should be a safe place at home. They might be sexually violent, and it's just horrendous when somebody is sexually violent, because what can we do? How can we fight back? We don't even have any power over our own body. There's the demander, who forces or manipulates us into doing trivial or pointless tasks. So they say, no, you're not using the right amount of washing up liquid. You need to do it again. You need to do it again. And you need to do it again. They want us to make sure that none of the food on their plate is touching. There's a lot of things that abusers do around food, and lots of people who've grown up in a household where someone was abusive will remember that the abuser will use meal times to be abusive, to throw food, to say that the food's rubbish or awful. And so often when we have food issues as an adult, it stems from that abusive behaviour that we've seen when we were growing up. And there's the nice one. Anytime that things we think we can't cope anymore, all of a sudden they'll become the nice one, and they'll be nice to us, and they'll tell us how much they love us. And for once we'll think maybe things are getting back to how they are. Maybe this is the time when things are going to change. And so we then have that hope that things are getting better. And that's probably why the nice one is almost the most dangerous, really, because we think that things are going to change. And And so we have hope, and hope is a very dangerous thing when there's an abuser around. So all of these different types of behaviour is what somebody is living with when they're living with an abuser, whether that abuser is they're married to them, whether they're boyfriend, girlfriend, whether they're dating, whether they're living in the same house or not. Those behaviours can be enacted, whether they're a young person, or whether they're an adult, or whether they're an older person. These behaviours can be perpetrated over and over again for the whole relationship. Now, if we were together in a room, I'd ask you, why is someone abusive? Why would somebody behave in these ways that I've just described? What would they be doing that for? So if you've got time, maybe pause the video and write down the reasons why you think somebody would be abusive. What is that? What is going on there? And then when you're ready, press play. If you don't have time to pause it, you'll just get to stay with me now anyway. So why is someone abusive? And some of the things that, if you did write this down on a piece of paper, and some of the things that people say when I ask this question in training, they'll say things like because of childhood trauma, because of alcohol or drug issues, because of stress, mental health issues. They might say it's about being on the autistic spectrum and struggling to communicate effectively. They might say, is it about unemployment or poverty? Is it poverty that does this? Is that what leads somebody to be abusive? And that there'll be various other things that might occur to you, or that might be stuff that you've encountered in your situation. You're thinking, oh, in that situation, what was going on was that person was clearly, when they were drunk, they would hit their partner, for instance. And while all of the things that I've just mentioned and all of the things you've written down may be factors going on in somebody's life who is abusive, it's actually generally not about those factors. That's not the root cause. What's interesting is, in Christian context, when I ask why is somebody abusive, I have yet to have somebody respond with because of sin or because of selfishness, which is interesting, because we as Christians are really familiar with the idea that sin and selfishness are the root of awful behavior or wrong behavior. But actually, it's really difficult to accept that abuse is a choice. We have this idea that somebody must be really broken if they're hurting another person. And while, yes, we're all broken and we all struggle and all that kind of stuff, actually, when somebody's being abusive, the person who's most broken is the person they're abusing. And we have this really tricky thing within Christian culture, which is about this kind of narrative which says everyone has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And that narrative is not necessarily wrong, but often we have a lot more to say to the sinner than we have to say to the sinned against. Actually, when somebody is told, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, that's great news for the sinner. But what does that mean for the woman who's been sexually assaulted? What does that mean for the person who has been degraded and violated by somebody else's sin? And clearly, the message of sin is one that says, actually, we are broken by other people's sinfulness. And it isn't that there isn't a message for those who've been sinned against. And of course, the sinned against are also people who sin as well. And so it is obviously more complex than that. And I wouldn't want to say that's not a message we should be giving, but we have to be really careful, because if somebody has been abused and hurt in some way, the message that everyone is a sinner will often perpetuate the messages they've got from the abuser, that they're not good enough, that they're bad, that there's something wrong with them. And leads them to feel a kind of sense that, I have to forgive the abuser. And a lot of stuff within Christian culture about forgiveness can be really, really harmful and dangerous when we are in a context thinking about abuse. So why is someone abusive? Fundamentally, it's about the beliefs that they hold. Jesus says the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And when somebody is abusive, what they are betraying is what they really believe, what they think inside their heart. And those beliefs are that the other person doesn't really matter as much as the abuser. The other person isn't as important as the abuser. Whose needs matter? The abuser's needs, not their wife or children, but the abuser. And so what we see and what research has shown is that when somebody is abusive, they have two core beliefs. And the first is that they own their partner. I own my partner, that they're a possession, and my children are a possession. That's why we see men killing women and men killing children. That rarely do we see women killing children when a relationship ends, but often we'll see the men killing children. Well, not often, but we do see that family annihilators are men who kill their children and their partner, or they may even kill themselves. But this is this belief that my children and my partner are a possession and I own them, and if I can't have them, no one can, because they're a thing that I own. They belong to me. So the first belief that is underpinning an abuser's behavior is ownership. I own my partner, and because I own my partner, I have the right to do what I want to her. I have the right to do what I want to my kids. I feel entitled to do what I want. So what we're seeing is beliefs of ownership and entitlement, and those beliefs underpin abusive behavior. And so when we're trying to deal with abusive behavior, when we're trying to enable abusers to change, we need to start from a position of thinking about ownership and entitlement, and addressing beliefs of ownership and entitlement, which underpin those controlling and violent and aggressive and manipulative behaviors. Because if you believe someone is an equal, and if you believe somebody is valuable, you don't treat them the way an abuser treats their partner or ex-partner and the children. And so I used to work with perpetrators. I used to co-facilitate a perpetrator program, and this is crucial to working with perpetrators, enabling perpetrators to realise that they don't own their partner. They're not entitled to get what they want, and that's we need to enable abusers to build empathy for the person that they've abused. And actually, that's what's going on. They're not, abusers are not psychopaths. They're not people who aren't capable of change. And the majority of abusers are making choices to reduce the empathy they have for their partner and children so that they can get what they want. And it might sound like, well, she's being very simplistic. And, what about drug and alcohol issues? What about mental health issues? What about, communication issues? So, for instance, drug and alcohol issues, if somebody is abusive, they may escalate their violence when they're drunk or when they're high, but actually they will continue to perpetrate controlling behaviours all the time. They will continue to diminish their partner and avoid responsibility for their behaviour. They will continue to humiliate their partner and do those not necessarily explicitly violent behaviours. And then when they're drunk or when they're high, that behaviour will escalate. But it's not the alcohol that's the problem. And what you'll often find is when an abuser is in alcohol or drug recovery, they will then use that recovery against their partner and say things like, do you want me to drink again? Because if you don't do what I want, that's what's going to happen. And suddenly their recovery is a way to control their partner, just as that alcohol is a way to control their partner. Similarly, mental health issues, abusers are very aware of what they're doing. Yes, an abuser may be depressed, but having counselling, a traditional counselling, will not necessarily help them to stop being abusive. In fact, often counsellors will collude with the narrative of the abuser and start to say things like, have you got attachment issues? Or will start to give the abuser other reasons why they're being abusive, rather than encouraging them to take responsibility for their behaviour. And what traditional counselling does is it looks at my feelings and other people's actions. And what an abuser needs to do is look at my actions and other people's feelings. And so counselling and how it's set up is not necessarily the best environment. Traditional counselling, anyway, is not the best environment for an abuser to be able to change. And so by understanding that the root of abuse is ownership and entitlement, we can start to challenge abusive behaviour. We can start to create context where that's not accepted. So, if you're in a context and somebody's making jokes about their wife or their spouse or their girlfriend and kind of behaving in ways that make you think, hang on, that person doesn't sound like they respect their partner very much. Challenging that and saying that's not an acceptable way to talk about your kids or your girlfriend or your fiance or whatever. That's not okay. And recognizing when you're seeing beliefs of ownership and entitlement emerge, if somebody's got to go away for work, do they check in with their partner first to say, actually, is it all right for me to travel, or do you need me to be here for the kids and for you? Do they think they can just do whatever they want, or are they putting their partner and their children's needs before their own? And so understanding ownership and entitlement is crucial. One of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is about abuse in childhood, that often people think, well, somebody who is being abused is more likely to be an abuser. The vast majority of people who are abused do not become abusers, and actually that what they've been put through motivates them to never ever treat anybody abusively ever. And I think we have to be really careful about writing off people who've been abused by saying, well, that they might become an abuser. About 50% of domestic abusers have seen a male role model be abusive to a female when they were a child. And what we discover is it's not about trauma. It's not that they're so traumatized that they act that out in their relationship. It's more that they've learned that this is how men treat women. They've learned those beliefs of ownership and entitlement when they're growing up. But actually about 50% of abusers haven't grown up in a household where they've seen a male role model be abusive to a female. And so we can't say that this is about always about having grown up in a household with somebody who's a male who's abusive. But the reality is we all live in a society where there's lots and lots of messages about male ownership of women. Anybody who has been exposed to pornography will know that every single popular pornographic video shows men dominating, degrading, violating women up to very, very brutal levels. That when we look at the sorts of images that we see in the media, they very often show women as sexualized and objectified. And that's not to say men are not sexualized, but often men who are sexualized into powerful positions. They're stood up, powerful. Women are lying down, they're baring their necks, they're much less likely to be clothed. And so those messages, and the reality is, up until about 150 years ago, men did own women in this country. The majority of the Bible shows relationships where men sell their daughters to the husbands, and so we are within a context where male ownership of women is not that long ago something that was enshrined within law. Women couldn't vote because it was seen that the husband did the voting, the father did the voting, the woman didn't need to. And so it's not surprising that these beliefs are still across our society and are still infused in how lots and lots of people behave. And so being aware of that is important. So understanding ownership entitlement is crucial. Understanding how abusive behaviour manifests is also really crucial. Now to think about what that means for the coronavirus and what is going on at the minute. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you've probably seen news articles, you've probably heard stuff about domestic violence and the virus. And Priti Patel spoke at one of the briefings about how much resources that were going into domestic violence support and that kind of stuff at this time. And so there has been a rise in the perpetration of domestic violence at this time, but it's really important to understand it is not, what we're not seeing is lots more men becoming abusive as a result of the virus. That's not what we're seeing. We're not seeing an increase necessarily in the number of perpetrators. What we're seeing is the existing perpetrators escalating the amount of violence that they're perpetrating, escalating the amount of controlling behavior that they're perpetrating. This isn't about lots and lots of people who are stressed because they're locked down together and one of them is just lashing out. That's not what we're seeing in terms of a rise in domestic violence and the reporting of domestic violence. What we're seeing is that those who are already existing abusers are escalating their behavior, are more often they're being abusive, and they are being more violent and more aggressive than they were prior to the lockdown. It's really important to understand that, because otherwise we start to think this is about stress, this is about financial worries, and although those things can be factors, that's not actually what is going on. What is going on is that during the coronavirus and during this lockdown particularly, what is happening is that abusers have greater opportunity to abuse their partner, and they have greater opportunity to isolate. If isolation is a tactic of an abuser, as we said earlier, imagine how much more effective that isolation can be now that the woman is essentially quarantined. Now she has has no access to go to work, to go to see her friends, to speak to her family. Now that he is in the house with her all the time, he can control her mobile phone. Prior to this, he might have had a tracker on her phone. Prior to this, he might have been doing all sorts of things to control her. But now he's with her 24/7 because she's not going to work and he's not going to work and they're in the home. And so he has greater opportunity to be abusive. So the first thing we need to understand is that the reason why we've seen increased perpetration of abuse is because of the opportunity that the lockdown presents for greater degrees and higher escalation of abusive behavior from existing perpetrators. The second thing that lockdown enables, and it's linked to opportunity, is I describe it as the emboldenment of abusers. So an abuser is now in a situation where they're not having their beliefs challenged, where they're not having their behavior challenged. They don't have to modify their behavior. And abusers do modify their behavior when they're with their boss, when they're with their family, when they're at church, when they're with their friends. They want everyone around them to believe their narrative, so that if their partner says, no, he's hurting me, the people around the abuser are going to say things like, no, not him. He's such a good guy. No, not him. He's a really good friend to me. Like, he looks after you. He supports you. And so it's not in the abuser's interest for everybody in their life to know that they're abusive. The reality is that most abusers are only abusive to their partner and to their children and to their ex-partners. They're not usually abusive to their boss. They're not usually abusive to the bus driver. They're not abusive to their colleagues or to their friends or family. That door closes in their home and suddenly their behavior changes. And so what happens is there's no need to modify their behavior. They're not having to pretend to be a nice person. They're not having to pretend to be a good dad or to be a good partner. And so they are emboldened because there's no one around to need to modify their behavior for. And actually, they don't have anybody challenging them. They've got no need to speak nicely to their partner in front of people. And so that cumulative effect of the ability to be abusive more often with no challenge emboldens the abuser to be able to do more behavior and know that they can get away with it. And they've got the virus to threaten their partner with. Do you want the kids to get this virus? Do you want them to die? Because if you go out, that's what's going to happen. If you leave me, if you go into a refuge, that's what's going to happen. And so they've got the threat of the children or the woman getting the virus, or they might use the virus and say, I think I've got the virus, and threaten to give it to the children or to the woman if she doesn't do what he wants. So the virus can be used in lots of ways, and this is particularly the case for women who have got health vulnerabilities. So somebody already has a respiratory issue, their abusive partner will use that respiratory issue to isolate them further and say, well, I'm doing it for your good. I'm doing it for your good. You need to not be speaking to people. You need to not be leaving the house. You need to be with me all the time because I love you. And so through the lockdown, they can create a narrative which says, I'm doing this for you. It's because I love you that I treat you like this. And so that's what we're seeing with the lockdown. We're not seeing, this is not about stress. This is not about financial pressures. This is not about being cooped up together, about trying to home educate your kids. Because, for those of you watching this who are not abusive, I can guarantee that as a result of the lockdown, you haven't wanted to punch your partner, and you haven't wanted to be violent to your kids, and you haven't wanted to make your spouse or your children feel humiliated or degraded. You haven't wanted to control them or to shut them up or to scream in their face. Yes, you might have felt frustrated. Yes, you might have found things difficult, but you don't want to control or harm the people that you love as a result of that. And so somebody who is abusive, that their behavior prior to the lockdown is likely to be escalating at this time. And also because a woman is stuck in the home and doesn't have the opportunity to go to do her job, and doesn't have the opportunity to see friends or family, the level of threat that she feels her partner poses to her legitimately is going to go up. And so she's more likely to potentially seek help than she might have done prior to that. However, it must also be acknowledged that a lot of women will not seek help while there's a lockdown because it's not safe to. They don't have any space where the abuser is not there keeping an eye on them. They can't make phone calls. They can't use the internet and do anything because their partner is keeping track on it they're doing. And so until the lockdown ends, they're going to really struggle to seek help. And so being aware that actually whatever interventions we do, whatever we're doing as a community or as workers in your context, be aware that this has to be for the long haul. It's not a case that when the lockdown ends, domestic violence levels are all going to be fine and it's fine. These are going to be very traumatized people who have been through absolute hell over the last few months. And so we're going to have all sorts of support in place to help people and to help people if they want to leave at the point that it's now safe because they're no longer is a deadly virus that might kill them or their kids or their mum or somebody else alongside the potentially deadly abuser that they've just been living with over the last few months. So being aware of that's really important. Okay, so what can you do? What can you do as a worker, as somebody who is trying to support people, who's trying to make a difference in this crisis? It's complicated, and I would say in some ways there's not a whole lot you can do right now. You can be vigilant, be alert, as the government's saying. You can be alert to abuse. If abusers are being emboldened when they go to the supermarket, they may not modify their tone anymore. If we live next to somebody and we're hearing aggression and violence, or other behaviours that we're concerned about, that abuser may be emboldened and may not be modifying their behaviour for the neighbours like they used to. And so we need to be ready to call the police. We need to be ready to have a helpline number available. We need to have, even if you just carry some cards with the domestic violence helpline. So if you see somebody in a shop who is kind of behaving in ways and you think I want to try and support their partner, then try and find a way to give them a card with a helpline number on. If there's people in your family group, in your friendship group, in your church, and you're noticing that they've withdrawn from conversations and they're not available anymore, I definitely try to continue to pursue that relationship. It may not even be about abuse. It might be that they're feeling really depressed or anxious as a result of the global pandemic we're all dealing with. And so being vigilant to keep in touch with people who seem to have dropped off the radar of community, whether that's in church or outside of church. So being vigilant and trying to remain in contact with different people. If you're noticing a few people who've dropped off the radar, I would maybe as a team try to kind of allocate different people to check in on. And obviously you don't want to annoy people or hassle them when they're just too busy with work or something, but just to be aware of being vigilant to what might be going on. I'd really suggest educating yourself about abusive behaviour. And I don't want to do too much of a book plug, but if you are interested in reading more, if you've got time in the lockdown, I know I haven't, so I don't presume that you have, but if you're finding you've got more time as a result of this crisis, then have a read of my book. And if you haven't got time, but you're passionate about this issue and you want to understand this issue, I'd really recommend getting hold of a copy of my book. It's called Out of Control: Couples, Conflict and the Capacity for Change, and it's published by SPCK, but you can get it in all good book outlets. So that would be a really good place to start if you want to understand these issues, because the reality is that unless you're an expert in abuse, you're going to need to get support from experts. You're going to need to keep learning. The reality is if we think we've arrived, we usually haven't. We can never, ever stop learning about this stuff. And it is a specialist issue. This isn't just a relationship issue. This isn't just a kind of a bit of a struggle. This is really serious stuff, that men who are abusive kill women. We have seen a doubling of men killing women. A lot of these men and their partners have never come into contact with any agencies before. And so the reality is that there are real serious risks to not doing this stuff well. And so it's really important to be thinking about how you can learn and grow and that kind of stuff. So I will send over some helpline details that might be useful as well. So hopefully those can be circulated as well. And what else can you do? you can be in it for the long haul. This is not going to be a short-term thing. This is going to be years of trauma. This is going to be once, these lockdown measures, these quarantine measures are all going to be gradually released. And there's going to be points at which women feel it's safer to leave. And so we need to be there. This isn't just something that's an issue for now. This is an issue for always. And so committing to respond to domestic violence and to hold abusers to account and to be there for women and children who are being subjected to abuse is absolutely crucial. One very practical thing, just be aware that Facebook, if somebody has an abusive partner historically or an ex-partner who's abusive, Facebook is often not a safe place for them to be. And so if you're doing a lot of engaging people via Facebook, be aware that lots of women who've been abused by a partner don't use Facebook because it's there's lots and lots of risks around their abusive partner finding them on there. In places like Twitter, you can be much more anonymous than you can be on Facebook. So just very practically think about which technical solutions are you engaged with to try to be there for people, and are you being aware of the ways that might be being monitored by an abuser? Can you create a sort of code system that you broadcast across your network so that everybody who is engaging with your network knows that if there's a message to anybody in the network that is saying something like, I know, I'd really like to go to holiday to the Maldives next year, that that's code for there's a really serious risk going on here. So obviously the problem with broadcasting any sort of message, which is a coded message, is that the abuser could then see that coded message and then could say, that could become a risk for the woman who's being subjected to the abuse. So just to be aware that it's more complicated than that. But the other thing I'd be suggesting that is absolutely crucial for you to do is connect with your local domestic abuse service. They are the experts. And so I would be contacting that local service and asking, how can you support them? What do they need? How can you be there for them? Whether that's about being there kind of pastorally and just being kind of, look, we just want to cheer you on and tell you what you're doing is amazing. Whether that's about practically supporting, donating sanitary towels and tampons, donating food to the refuge, donating duvets or sleeping bags. It may be that you have people within your networks who have second homes, which you could maybe offer to the domestic abuse service for women who are fleeing, who aren't able to go into refuge accommodation. So don't go to those abuse services and say, we can offer this. Go to those abuse services and say, what can we do to support you? And what do you need? And also, what can you offer to the women who are in our community who might be seeking help, so that you can more effectively signpost. And the last thing I'd say is, do not think that faith communities are immune. Do not think this is just something that happens out there to those women in poor communities. Yes, there is increases in abuse in urban areas, but there is also increases in abuse in rural areas, in posh areas with very middle-class families. The problem is that those houses are further apart and nobody can hear the screams. The reality is that abusers come in all different contexts. There are abusers who are police officers, who are judges, who are church leaders, who are on benefits and unable to work. There are abusers across every sector and every strata of society, and being aware of that is really important. So please don't only think this is about those people that we're helping, or those people we're supporting, or those people who we're trying to show Jesus to. Also be vigilant where that might be something that's going on in your community, within your church, within your your community, or within the wider message organisation. So please be vigilant across the board, and do not think that this is not going on in the church, because it absolutely is. I think I've probably come to the end of what I have time to say. So I hope this has been really useful to you. To give you those websites and book details again, my website is www.nataliecollins.info. The course that you might want to do training on to be able to work with women who've been subjected to abuse is the Own My Life course, and it's www.ownmylifecourse.org. I've also written a course for young people to help them to make good choices in relationships and to understand abuse and exploitation. That's called the Day Programme. That's www.dayprogram.org, and that program is spelled with a double M-E at the end, the English way. And lastly, if you're interested in the work of Press Red, Red. Their website is pressred.org. Feel free to contact me via my website if you want to know any more information. And I thank you for the ways that you are working to make a difference to some of the most vulnerable in our society, and the ways that you are committed to showing Jesus to those people. I want to finish by praying. So if you would join with me in prayer. God, thank you that you are a good God. Thank you that you love women and that you love men. And thank you that through Jesus, you have given us a new way to live, that you have given us a way that is transformative, that is liberative, and that enables us to become all of who you made us to be. And I pray for each of those who are participating in this session, that they would know you, and they would hear your truth and your voice. That God, for those who this session has brought up stuff in their personal lives, historically or present, would you give them the love and the peace and the resources they need to be able to deal with what has been brought up for them. For those who are seeing stuff that's gone on in their family or friends' lives or in the lives of other people they know, would you give them the resources and equip them to be able to be good friends and good supporters to those who are struggling? And would you enable each person to find ways to make a difference on this issue in this day and in every day? Thank you, good God, for all that you give us and all that you are. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for having me, and have a blessed rest of your day.